Hey there, welcome to the Bible in 5. This week you're going to be reading the book of Esther. And it's not a super long book, and I think it's one of the more exciting, thrilling, keep you on the edge of your seat type of stories. There's a number of things that make Esther, I think, one of the most curious and odd books in the entire Old Testament. The storyline is set right in the middle of the storyline that you've been reading so far. It happens after the exile, and in fact, the events that take place here happen after the Israelites have been exiled 150, 200 years ago in the past. And it's a group of Israelites living in the capital city of the Persian Empire. And they've been living here for a long time. It's their home. It's where they live. And the key figures are a woman named Esther and her caretaker, likely uncle, named Mordecai. And so you have these Israelites. They're a religious, ethnic minority living in Persia. And curious things about this story are that God is never mentioned. God is seemingly absent in the storyline. But the other main feature that this combines with is that the story is full of irony and reversals and crazy things you would never think would happen, and lots of coincidences and so on. And so what the story gets you to think about is when God's people are living outside, they're foreigners, they're exiles, when it seems like there are forces working against them, is God really absent? Is he really nowhere to be found? Or is it possible that through the strange twists of fate and coincidence, God is still weaving a meaningful story of redemption in the lives of his people? And so the story begins with the king of Persia giving this ridiculous edict that all of the men of Persia should be the masters and rulers of their own homes. But then what goes on and happens in the very next chapter is that he selects Esther as a wife, and the whole story is about Esther essentially just telling the king of Persia what to do. He is definitely not the master of his house. Esther turns out to be. Again, it's a strange twist of fate. And so Esther becomes the king's wife. For what purpose? We're not sure yet. Then we're introduced to another set of characters. Mordecai, Esther's caretaker or uncle, comes into conflict with a high-ranking Persian official, a guy named Haman. And Haman is this high and mighty, thinks highly of himself, and Mordecai refuses to bow down to him. So it's another one of these stories. It's very similar to the book of Daniel. Israelites find themselves in conflict or in tension with the culture where they're in exile, and Mordecai chooses to honor God rather than Haman. This totally ticks Haman off, and so Haman goes to the king and tries to get not just Mordecai, but all of the Israelite Jewish people killed, and he tricks the king into making an edict to do so. So chapter 6 and 7 is where the action, the tension of the book comes together. Mordecai and Esther work behind the scenes to get the king to reverse his edict or save the Jewish people somehow. And again, God's name is never mentioned, but these chapters are about how through irony and reversal, God accomplishes salvation of the Jewish people from being destroyed in exile. And so what essentially happens is that Haman, who was the one trying to kill Mordecai and the Jewish people, he ends up groping Esther, and the king walks in and he's like, what are you trying to do to my wife? And so he ends up executing Haman with the very instruments that Mordecai was going to be executed on. Again, irony and reversal, and God accomplishing salvation. And so the book ends with the Jewish people essentially being allowed by the king of Persia to eliminate all of their enemies, and they institute a feast called Purim. And Purim is one of the few feasts in Israelite tradition that was not instituted back in the wilderness people by God and connected to Israel's story. Again, it's one of these feasts where it's about God's absence or his work behind the scenes, and today Purim is essentially celebrated like Halloween is in America. You just party and eat a lot of candy, and people drink a lot. Anyway, that's how people celebrate Purim today. So that's how the book comes to its climax. The people are saved, and they celebrate in the Feast of Purim. So Esther's a very interesting story, both because of God's absence, but also it's a very powerful message. And I think what the book is trying to get us to see is that in the story of God's people, there are many times where it seems like God is absent. And that's happened a lot in the story so far. We're wondering, how is God going to work in the lives of these people? He allowed them to go into exile. What about the times when it seems like everything is working against God's people and God is nowhere to be found? And the story comes along and it says, right where you think God is absent, those are the times and places where God is most present, working in strange, mysterious, sometimes ironic ways behind the scenes. So the book is actually trying to help challenge and increase our faith as God's people, even in times where it's difficult to have faith that God's at work. So it's a very powerful story. It's exciting to read, but again, I just encourage you to let this story do its work on you and challenge your worldview and how you think God is at work in your life and in your story. So thanks for watching. We'll see you next week.